In this episode, we speak to IT Governance Manager Michael Brenner. He has a personal challenge of introducing service management to a group of highly qualified technical colleagues. This spurred him on to getting involved in the development of FitSM, as he needed a simple but comprehensive service management solution that wasn't available from any of the existing approaches. He talks us through the business drivers behind its development and why organizations should adopt FitSM rather than a more complex approach. In Michael's own words, FitSM is a way to better the world. The key to its success is its simplicity, and the development team adopted a philosophy from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing more to take away. Michael is convinced that FitSM is a much more efficient and relevant approach for the majority of organizations. Listen on to hear in Michael's own words why he is so enthusiastic about the wider business benefits of FitSM. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We are here to help you and your organization understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Michael Brenner. Michael is a specialist in service management and information security management. He has a PhD in computer science and more than a decade of practical leadership in the implementation and maintenance of relevant management systems. He keeps up to date as an active consultant, trainer and auditor in these areas associated with IT and cybersecurity. Michael is a founding member of the FitSM working group, which is part of ITMO. FitSM was developed as an alternative to very complex service management approaches. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Richard.
Michael, what was the business driver behind the development of FitSM? What problem did you and the other members of the development team set out to solve?
Okay, so the origin of FitSM lies in an EU project that was called FitSM, Federated Service Management. And the original problem statement was, how can we introduce service management effectively in small e-infrastructure provider organizations that provide federated services. So that's a lot of, EU speak about, or EU research community speak about rather small organizations. I would say the typical e-infrastructure provider would be a small research organization of, say, maybe 40 or 50 people, or might even be just a team within, say, a university computing center, and that team would consist of only like maybe 5 or 10 people. So rather small organizations working together in a kind of peer-to-peer manner to provide services for various researchers and research communities. And so from there's two problems. So how do we do federated service provision, where there's no clear hierarchical structure, no clear supply chain, which in effect proved a little bit difficult for the scope of the project in the end. During that time and the years immediately after that, I think like 5 of my colleagues at the Leibniz Supercomputing Center wrote whole PhD thesis about doing that, just for 1 or 2 processes in very specific kinds of federations. But the other obvious problem that had to be solved first, of course, was how can we introduce service management in these small and, non-commercial small organizations. And a few of them had tried and failed with ITIL before that.
So that, I mean, that's fascinating. So people had tried the industry standard, and the industry standard was difficult to adapt to that federated approach with sort of a lot of research and small organizations. So what was your personal motivation, though, of joining the team? Was this a challenge that you had faced as a researcher yourself, as a someone that had sort of managed a small team? Was this a personal problem? Did you set out on a personal crusade to help people solve that problem, or was there another reason?
Yeah, well, I think you put it very well. I mean, there was a positive side to it. I mean, obviously, it was my first EU project that I could join, and that seemed like a very nice thing at the time. There's a little bit of travel. By that time, when FitSM started, that was 2012, I was just 5 years into working as the head of IT service management at the Leibniz Supercomputing Center of the Bavarian Academy of Sciences and Humanities. So, after 5 years, it was nice to get like 1/5 of my time off, to travel around and, help other organizations with service management. So there was a personal motivation, a positive one. And when introducing service management at the Leibniz Supercomputing Center, I had some frustrations myself with, the industry standards. I was a big fan of ITIL version 2, and ITIL version 3 just came out when I started at the Leibniz Supercomputing Center. And immediately I looked at it and I thought, well, I mean, my hopes for version 3 had been, I hope they just, address these minor inconsistencies in ITV2 guidance and make it a little bit more concrete, maybe a template, something like that. And instead it was just more. And so the Leibniz Supercomputing Center is not that big of an organization itself. I mean, it has like 200 staff, maybe 150 IT staff. So that's not like a big corporation where you can say, well, we have like a IT service management staff of 10 full-time employees or so. So resources were limited, and that was one problem. We had just gone from 10 processes to, in the beginning, we didn't even know, like 23, 26. While all the time I had been working at the university researching service management, and I had gone to all the conferences, and the consensus was like 80% of the organizations didn't even really run more than 5 or 6 or 7 of the ITIL version 2 processes. And so that was not good from my point of view. Also, when I looked at the training material, I mean, that was at that point of time. I cannot say if that, I mean, I know it has improved a little bit in the meantime, but at that point of time, it had become this 3-day ITIL foundation that covered all those topics, and especially these really new high-level topics, that were really, from my point of view, quite far away from what normal personnel at an IT organization cared about, service value creation patterns and all this stuff from the service strategy book that literally took up 20% of the foundation time. And I just pictured myself, being new in my job, having to prove myself, well, to management, but also to like 150 colleagues. Most of them were really nerdy, techie guys, and I was picturing myself trying to explain to them, okay, now we're going to talk like the better half of a day about service strategy. And I mean, how is this going to influence my position, my standing here, and the standing of my project, which is to introduce, let's just start with change management, service level management, incident management. So then, yeah, I had my frustrations with that, and that's actually when I got involved with ISO 20000. So we swung actually quite rapidly from ITIL to orienting ourselves to the process framework of ISO 20000 at the time. Um, and which was relatively new back then. And yeah, that ISO 20000 never developed that kind of community in the secondary literature and the kind of guidance that I had actually hoped for. So I saw FitSM as a way to, you know, to better the world, so to speak, in that respect. At least at that time, the original idea was, just for research community and universities and research organizations and so on. It was only later in the project that we realized, there's other small organizations that are not research oriented at all who are quite interested in this. So that's it, how it came about, actually.
It's a fascinating story. So, but I mean, your comment about ISO 20000, though, Michael, it's interesting, isn't it? There isn't really a community of practitioners associated with ISO standards that share that that same camaraderie, I suppose, about how can you help others understand best practice. So it's an interesting concept. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it seemed to be much more business-like, the ISO market, rather than the best practice market, is much more collaborative.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, again, you talking about trying to convince your colleagues of, we need to understand these 27 processes if we're going to deliver service management. There's a very well-known English quotation. I can't remember who actually said it. It's always attributed to lots of people. And it is, please accept my apologies for this long letter. I did not have time to write a short one. So, was it hard condensing service management to its core? I mean, was it something that you were surprised about how difficult it was, or were you surprised about how easy it was?
Well, I like that saying. It actually reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I think is attributed to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I hope I didn't butcher that name, but that French author and pilot who authored The Little Prince. And not in The Little Prince, but somewhere he wrote that perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And I always really liked that because, it became very clear to me at the beginning of my service management journey that, nobody was going to read like a policy that was 15 pages long or process definition. Okay, maybe a couple of people out of 200, 2 out of 200 would read that, But yes, simplicity is really key in my opinion. And it was, it's hard to maintain, let's put it this way. In the beginning, it was not so hard to achieve because we started out small. And we made a very conscious decision from the very beginning that we kind of wanted to have that ISO-like structure where we would separate the absolutely essential from the non-essential, to separate the requirements from the guidance. And that really helped a lot. That helped keep FitSM1 really, really simple and straightforward. And I think that was the best design decision we made. And we really tried to keep it that way. But, I think it's now the third edition of FitSM1 that we are publishing. And every new edition, maintaining that simplicity, that's hard work. There's always a lot of discussions because, a lot of people will always agree on adding stuff. agreeing on deleting stuff, that's much more difficult. And so it's, but I mean, sometimes, times change and our views change and we learn more. So we want to add a little bit of stuff. And then we kind of have to force ourselves to take something out for that. And yeah, those are always long discussions that, some of us leave kind of exhausted at the end of the day, but I think it's worth it. Yes.
It's a real challenge, though, isn't it? I mean, if you think about some of the ISO standards, an ISO standard there's a proliferation of substandards. People aren't willing to accept that the generic will work for them. They have to take the generic and add things around it to make it specific for their particular industry or their particular activity.
Mm-hmm.
And it loses a lot of value in that regard, doesn't it? As you add more things, it becomes more challenging because there's things in it that don't apply to you.
And that's, I think, that's the fundamental difference in approach of philosophy, if you want to call it that, between ITIL and FitSM. I mean, ITIL just throws like these 1,000 pages of guidance at you. And, well, I mean, you're going to use all of that only if you're the biggest corporation in the world. Maybe not even then. And so it's your job, if you need just 20 pages of guidance from that, it's your job to pick those 20 pages out of those 1,000. And FitSM kind of goes the other way. It says, well, here's 10 pages. I think this applies to everybody. You will probably need another 10 pages or so. So, go look about in other standards and literature or come up with your own and, find the rest of the 10 pages yourself. But, well, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think that's a much better and a much more efficient approach.
So is FitSM compatible with other standards? Is it compatible with, say, ISO 20000 and ISO 27000? Or is it a completely different approach where, you've either got to use FitSM or you've got to use ISO 20000?
No, I mean, of course, the compatibility is, I mean, like a cornerstone of FitSM, the ISO 20000 compatibility. I think if you read FitSM 1, it, the similarities between FitSM 1 and ISO 20001 are quite apparent. Maybe even more so now than they used to be, even though, the new version of ISO 20000, it kind of softened up that process model. So now there are more activities or practices or processes, but in other regards, especially like, the level of documentation that is required, actually 20,000 kind of I mean, it got closer to FitSM 1, in my opinion, in some respects. And no, we always felt that this is quite important, that you had a way not just to introduce and establish service management, but you had a way to prove to external parties that you had achieved a certain capability level in service management via an external audit and by, a certification body or another reputable organization, but based on a standardized certification procedure. And while we are in the process of developing something like that for FitSM, but for most of the time, we relied on ISO 20000. So we had this guide, how to kind of upgrade from FitSM to ISO 20000, which is a little bit outdated now because for 3.5 years we've now had a new ISO 20000, also new FitSM version is just coming out. And but No, I think going from FitSM1 to the new 20,001, that's less of an effort than going from the old 20,001 to the new 20,001. And also, even in the original FitSM project, I mean, we had like 3 consulting partners and 3 implementation partners. So 3 organizations in the context of the FitSM project implemented service management. And one of them achieved ISO 20000 certification, I think like 18 months later or so after the conclusion of the project.
That's very good. You mentioned about a maturity model.
Mm-hmm.
So is the next version of FitSM, will it have a maturity model for people to use?
Oh, we do have a maturity model. It's FitSM 6.
And are people using it?
Yes.
Are
Yes, yes, yes,
people
yes.
sort of buying into it and continuous improvement using FitSM?
Yes, it's so FitSM 6 is kind of a self-assessment tool, which we will also use as the basis for the certification program, though, for organizations. And I mean, it needs somebody knowledgeable to apply it, but I mean, if you're a service management professional, it's quite easy to apply. I think it really helps you to make an assessment of the current status of the various service management process at an organization. And it's being used quite a lot. I mean, we had people approach us from like, I will not name names, but from a not a big, but a not so small consultancy, IT consultancy here in Germany, who came to us and said, "Oh, we just love this. I mean, we're not even like the biggest FitSM practitioners in the world, but we just love this in our consulting work. Let us help you make a German translation of this because we are using it constantly in our consulting work."
Michael, you said earlier that FitSM is a slimline approach. There's 10 or 20 pages of guidance, and you can add something to it. So it's easier for people to understand, and it's easier for people to apply. But are there any other compelling reasons that you've come across in your consultancy or your research where people find it so much better than either an ISO standard or a larger service management approach, apart from the simplicity and the ease of understanding, and therefore the ease of communication through the business?
I'm going to say something about the apart from part anyway, but yes, it is more compatible. You're not locked into one framework. It is auditable. I mean, that's a weird word, but just like in ISO standard, I mean, that doesn't make it better than an ISO standard, but I mean, just as an ISO standard, it's auditable. So you can say if you're FitSM compliant or if you're not FitSM compliant. You cannot say if you're ITIL compliant or not ITIL compliant because ITIL doesn't contain any requirements that you could audit against, that you can use as audit criteria. So I think that's important. And when you consider that, I mean, it's quite cost effective. I mean, I know the costs for the books or the standards, I mean, they're not that substantial for a commercial organization, but they play a role in smaller organizations and the scientific community and universities and so on. And it's much more approachable. I mean, it's all under Creative Commons licenses. So, everybody in your organization who wants to take a look at it can take a look at it. Everybody who wants to participate in the betterment of it can participate in it. It's not just, and unlike, the ISO standards, I mean, they have the requirements, then they have some guidance. What they usually don't have is any templates or samples we have samples and templates that you can use. They're also under Creative Commons license. I mean, you can just take them, use them, adapt them. I mean, for all we care, make a commercial product out of them. I mean, there are various forms of Creative Commons licenses, and we use a very liberal one. So I think that's a big plus too in many environments.
You make a very interesting point there about the cost of an ISO standard. That, these days they may be online, but you have a personal copy, and in order to get copies or a license for an organization where everybody that may need to know a little bit about it needs to have their own license, or there's a very large fee for a corporate license, is very restrictive, isn't it? That, it helps if everybody has an understanding, but if you've got to give a separate license to everybody just so they can have a basic understanding, it does mitigate against adopting some of those standards. Whereas your approach with FitSM and the Creative Commons license and freely available, as you say, means any organization, large or small, can ensure anyone associated with service management within that organization can understand the basics. Oh, it's a real approach, isn't it, for the current drive towards community sharing, open source documentation.
Absolutely. And, the difficult parts of implementing service management in an organization, it's not drawing the process diagram or writing the documentation. It's getting everybody on board because, processes, they have this property that they a lot of people get involved from, different parts in a hierarchical organization. I mean, it's cross-functional. Most processes are cross-functional. So you have to get a lot of people involved, from different departments, different teams. And yeah, I mean, it helps a lot to take them aboard and, not have to say, I'm the only guy who went to that expert course, so I'm going to tell everybody in the organization how we do this, and nobody can look into my books because I have just this one set of them. You just have to trust me that I'm the expert. And so you can have a much more collaborative approach towards implementing service management, which can be sometimes a lot of work too, because I mean, people will challenge you. They read that, especially in the nerdy IT tech organizations. People will actually read all of that, and they will start asking questions. Michael, I mean, do you really interpret this requirement in this and that way? And can't we do it in another way? And I mean, then you have to think about it and you have to have an answer. But I think in the long term, that's just a much more sustainable and better approach.
Yeah. All of our process would be much easier, wouldn't they, if people were not involved?
Yes.
It's the
Indeed.
people always that cause the problem.
Yeah.
Michael, before we finish, are there any plans for IT mode to look at other approaches, or are your hands full with maintaining and simplifying and improving FitSM?
Actually, well, my hands are kind of full with FitSM, truth be told. I mean, we always have these plans about, certain extensions like guides, like how does FitSM interrelate with other standards or approaches like agile development and so on. DevOps, for example. And so there's always stuff to do there. Or at least I personally, I mean, I had another working group at ITMO actually, but no, I've pretty much given up on that, and I'm trying to concentrate on FitSM because, well, I mean, as we talked about, I also have another job, but yeah, so I think there's a lot of value still to create within the FitSM context, because obviously, just if you look at FitSM4 and FitSM5, which are collections of guides, like kind of white papers, and especially our templates, there's still work enough, I think, for the next few years.
Michael, many thanks for your time. Many thanks for sharing your thoughts and the background to FitSM and the future for FitSM. Really good catching up with you.
Yes.
And thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much too. And yes, it was very nice speaking to you again, Richard.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.